In a country long divided by shouting headlines and flashing hashtags, change often arrives with a bang. But sometimes it creeps in quietly, under cover of normalcy and civility. That is what we are witnessing now. Nick Fuentes, once widely dismissed as a fringy alt-right provocateur, is no longer safely relegated to the cul-de-sac of American extremism. As revealed in a recent profile by Wired, Fuentes has publicly laid out a long-term plan to embed his followers, the so-called groypers, into institutions across the United States, using stealth, social media money, and institutional infiltration rather than open protests or loud rallies. If successful, this isn't just another protest movement. It could become a structural shift in how political power is exercised in America, not by winning hearts through ballots, but by quietly stacking corridors of power, one job, one influence network, one hidden donor at a time. The rise from the margins, Fuentes' ascent into the mainstream. For years, Fuentes was considered too extreme even by hardened MAGA loyalists. His record of explicit anti-Semitism, racism, misogyny, and Holocaust denial kept him outside the mainstream conservative fold. But over the past 12 months, everything changed. A now infamous interview on Tucker Carlson's show, formerly an untouchable bastion of cable conservative media, reached millions. Suddenly, the boundary between fringe and acceptable cracked. Many in the conservative media ecosystem reeled. Some condemned the platforming. Others stepped back, unwilling to be seen as endorsing extremism. The result, Fuentes, once written off, began to claim boldly that the Groyper army was no longer outside. It was inside. Inside conservative institutions, inside Washington-adjacent think tanks, inside youth political organizations, inside digital donor networks. That transition, from pariah to plausible influencer, may be the most dangerous shift of all. A strategy of stealth, infiltration over insurrection. What makes Fuentes' playbook particularly insidious is its calculated quietness. According to his own statements, his plan is not street violence or loud rallies. It's elite human capital, mapping voting blocks, and infiltrating politics from the inside. His nonprofit, the America First Foundation, originally a fringe vehicle, has reportedly begun vetting candidates for 2026 and beyond. The foundation intends to influence who gets elected and how by leveraging social media reach, donor networks, and grassroots mobilization of young, disaffected white men. This approach strikes not at the surface of politics, but at its plumbing. If they succeed, power flows won't depend on loud campaigns or bulked-up super PACs, but on quietly stacked positions, sympathetic appointees, and ideological vetting far upstream in party infrastructure. Rewriting the identity of conservatism, the GOP Civil War. Fuentes' rise hasn't just unsettled outsiders, it has fractured the conservative movement itself. What was once a fairly cohesive coalition of free market neoliberals, social conservatives, and national security hawks is now ripping apart along identity, ideology, and strategy lines. The tension is boiling over not only in media, but within policy, lobbying, and inside think tanks. Former GOP stalwarts, who historically supported alliances with Israel, global markets, and older conservative principles, are finding themselves ostracized by a younger, more radical faction that rejects those ties. The schism is public, bitter, and likely to endure. For a movement built on unity under MAGA, the current fissures pose an existential question. What remains of mainstream conservative values, and can they survive the metamorphosis? Ideology redefined, from populism to ethno-nationalism. In its earliest iterations, the far right in America justified itself with economic populism, trade skepticism, immigration restrictions, and distrust of global institutions. But Fuentes' version goes deeper. It anchors on race, religion, identity, and exclusion. Christian nationalism, white identity, and open anti-Semitism or contempt for Jewish influence is now foregrounded. He doesn't just deny the Holocaust, he mocks it, rationalizes white dominance, rejects multiculturalism, and calls for a redefinition of national identity in explicitly racial terms. This is not traditional conservatism. It is a new ideological force, reactionary, exclusionary, and potentially far more volatile. Danger to democracy. Subversion under the guise of legitimacy. What makes Fuentes' strategy especially dangerous is that it masquerades as legitimate political engagement. The America First Foundation, his interviews, recruitment efforts, and veneer of activism all give the illusion of normalcy. But beneath lies a core intent: to reshape institutions in a way that undermines pluralism, silences dissent, and concentrates power among a narrow demographic. When extremist ideology embeds itself quietly in campaign offices, donor roll calls, youth political organizations, it gains legitimacy. Accountability becomes harder, oversight becomes harder, resistance becomes morally murky, because outwardly no laws are being broken. If unchecked, this amounts to what many political scientists call entryism, not a revolution, but a takeover from within. The danger is not dramatic coups, it's silent transformation. The stakes. What Fuentes' success could mean for America. If Fuentes and his movement succeed in their plan, the consequences could span decades. Policy shift. Domestic and foreign policy may increasingly reflect exclusionary, isolationist, ethno-nationalist priorities, meaning harsher immigration laws, rollback of civil rights protections, and foreign policy realignment, normalizing hate. Ideas once deemed fringe, anti-Semitism, white nationalism, could be mainstreamed into political discourse, tolerated as legitimate viewpoints. Erosion of institutions. As extremists infiltrate think tanks, media, and government roles, institutions built on pluralism and checks and balances may be co-opted for sectarian ends. Youth radicalization. With a strong appeal among young, disaffected men, the movement risks radicalizing a generation, making extremist ideology the gateway to political engagement. Put simply, America's political and social equilibrium could shift in ways many believe uncivil, but once institutionalized, difficult to reverse. The choice ahead: resist, expose, or let it proceed. We are at a crossroads. The question isn't whether Fuentes has power, he already does. The question is whether society, the media, institutions, and the broader electorate will allow that power to go unchecked. This means several urgent tasks: full transparency in campaign funding, donor networks, and political staffing; vigorous journalistic exposure, not just of overt extremism, but of infiltration patterns, influence mapping, and ideological drift; civic education and media literacy, especially among young voters who may be drawn to extremist rhetoric unconsciously; vigilance by political institutions, enforcement of discrimination laws, promotion of inclusion, and safeguarding of civil rights. Defending democracy will require more than resistance to one individual. It will require a recommitment to pluralism, to openness, and to principle, even when extremism tries to dress itself as populism. For decades, America looked outwards for threats: rogue states, terrorism, ideological adversaries. Now, the threat may come from within, from a movement that presents itself as just another voice, while quietly rewiring power structures from the inside. Nick Fuentes and his America First project are the first insurgents in what may become a long shadow war, one fought not with guns, but with institutions, influence, and infiltration. The question for Americans, and for democracy, is whether we recognize the stakes before the transformation is complete. Because once the levers of power have been quietly switched, restoring openness, pluralism, and systemic fairness becomes infinitely harder. The battlefield is subtle, the actors are hidden, The consequences, if unchallenged, could rewrite the meaning of democracy in America.